I like the word resident better. I mean, that's just Joey's perspective. But the reason I like resident better is it reminds us every time we talk about these folks, it's that this is where they reside. This is where they live. This is their home. If we think about what most human beings think, we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Some of you may have had the exposure to this in an intro to psychology class or heard somebody talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the bottom of the pyramid, the base things that all human beings need: food, water, air, and shelter, a place to live. So if you're operating in this industry, you are at the base of the pyramid. Now, there's good news and bad news for that. The good news is we will always need a place to live. Any human that you meet will ideally want a place to live, and they will always want the place they're living in to be better than the place they used to live in. This is the natural human condition. Better doesn't necessarily mean bigger, doesn't necessarily mean more amenities, more services, but in their mind, their feeling wants to be, oh, I am making progress in my life. I am living in somewhere that serves my needs, my wants, my desires even better today than it did a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The opportunity for property owners, for property managers, for landlords, fill in the blank with whatever word we want to use, is to recognize that the experience we are creating is what builds loyalty. The experience we're creating is what builds word of mouth marketing and gets people talking about, I love living here. It's pretty rare, and I say this respectfully, to hear someone say, I love my landlord. I love my property management company. With all due respect to your amazing listeners, and who I know do a great job in these categories, the bar for experience in this industry is lying on the ground. And the expectation for all too long has been, well, the lights work, the heat works, the AC works. What are you complaining about? And this desire to not have as many interactions with the residents as we can, because every interaction we're like, oh, let's just hope it stays quiet. Let's hope we don't get any calls. Like, I talked to so many property managers are like, we love it when the phone doesn't ring. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the wrong way of thinking. You should love it every time you have an opportunity to interact with your residents, especially if it can be a proactive interaction instead of a reactive interactions.
Well, I like that whole, we started using residents over tenants a handful of years ago, and we started using clients over owners, because I think the words you use are important. I think landlords have a tough, they have a service and they have a product. And I think a lot of them feel that if I just kind of keep the wheels turning and you got a place that's clean and safe and functional, what else owe you? You owe me your money and that's it. And I think they leave out that experience a lot.
Absolutely. And I think lots of times residents become out of sight, out of mind. So we put a lot of intentionality into, oh, how do we get someone to sign the lease? How do we get them in? How do we fill this empty space so we don't have the carrying cost of a place not being rented? But then once they sign up, there's usually a lot of conversation in the first 1 to 4 weeks. Oh, it wasn't what I promised when I moved in. I mean, I've moved into places, I've been a renter for 30 years. Okay, so I have a little bit of personal experience in this area. I've rented individual apartments. I've rented multi-room homes. I've rented in a variety of different cities and across a variety of different house styles. And what I think is fascinating is there's so much focus early on. Oh, let's get him moved in. And then it's like, cue the tumbleweed. Let's not have any interaction until it comes time to renew a lease or to deal with a problem. A huge opportunity for every owner listening is about 3 months in, just to send a gift to the resident, thanking them for paying their rent and thanking them for being part of your family and, living in your home or living in your apartment. There's an opportunity to reach out and say, hey, how's it going? Now that you're in, now that you're feeling it, what are the 2 or 3 things you wish were different? And they might say, oh, I really wish that, the sink wasn't clogging as much when I do the dishes. And you're like, I didn't even know the sink was clogging. Why didn't you reach out and tell us? Because a lot of residents will just deal with it. But while they're dealing with it, their relationship with you is declining because they're irritated that they have to deal with it. And you're like, I didn't even know it was a problem.
So how do service provider landlords overcome? I hear often a lot, like, if I call them, they're going to want a whole bunch of stuff, or if I give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Like, what's the mindset that landlords have to have when confronting that decision? Do I call them this month? Do I send something this month? Do I check in? Like that's it right there.
I get it, Mark, and I love this. So let's take it briefly out of the context of a relationship between an owner and a resident and look at dating. Because everybody who's listening probably at some point in their life has been involved in a dating relationship, and maybe even more than one. So here's the problem. You start dating someone new, and the natural human tendency is to compare that person to the other people you dated before them. Now, let's say you dated someone else that never liked going out to restaurants, always wanted to eat at home. And you start dating this new person, you're like, well, I guess we're always going to eat at home. Meanwhile, this new person's like, no, I like going to a restaurant sometimes. I like doing that. If we presume that our past experience in a relationship is indicative of what our future relationship experience is going to be with a completely different human, this is a completely different resident, we run into trouble. And I think too many owners, too many property management companies, too many landlords come from the perspective of, well, if I give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Well, what is that based on? Well, back in '04, I had a tenant who I called them and they told me there were 17 things wrong. And it turned into this huge cost and I had to replace all these blah, 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 blah. And it's like, wait a second. Are you still dealing with your own psychological and personal trauma off of that one resident issue you had? And now you've applied that to every resident that you will ever deal with? That's a little silly, don't you think? And so I believe that if there is going to be an issue, if a resident is going to have a complaint or want something different, I would rather know about that while we're in the relationship, while I'm not asking for a lease renewal, while I'm not trying to continue to get rent paid on a monthly basis as promised and as required by the lease. I'd rather know what the problem is sooner rather than later, because 9 times out of 10, if we know what the problem is early on, we can work with the resident to accomplish a solution. Most human beings more than happy to work with you and more than happy to be reasonable if they feel like they're being heard.
If you like this video, check out the other relevant videos that can be found here.